The day was already sweltering when King Robert Baratheon stalked through the dim corridors of the Red Keep, his footsteps echoing off the ancient stone walls. His brow glistened with sweat, and anger licked at the corners of his temper, hot and unsteady. The castle's thick walls offered little relief from the heat outside, and his courtiers were mindful to keep a safe distance, for the king's mood had not been this foul since the early days of his reign. Word had reached him that morning, whispered first by a frightened servant who overheard hushed talk from one of Lord Eddard Stark's men. If the rumor was true, it threatened to upend the very foundations upon which Robert's kingship stood. The truth about the boy, Ned's boy, Jon Snow, was so dire that it made Robert's head spin with fury and disbelief. His anger manifested in heavy, purposeful strides as he made his way to the Tower of the Hand, where Ned Stark was lodged. The hush of servants scattering in his wake only worsened his growing sense of betrayal. He thought Ned had confided everything to him, had laid bare all secrets in the aftermath of the rebellion. That was the bedrock of their brotherhood. But if what Robert had heard was true, if Jon Snow was not Ned's bastard but rather the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, then Ned had lied to him for nearly 2 decades. The realization was like a physical blow, rattling Robert's mind. He fought to steady himself. He would not show weakness. Not now. Ned Stark looked up from a letter as the door to his solar slammed open with a force that nearly tore it from its hinges. Robert's presence filled the room. He carried the essence of a storm behind him, swirling with confusion and anger. The king's eyes were bloodshot, his face flushed, and his lips were drawn into a thin line. He slammed his meaty fist against Ned's desk with such violence that the inkpot toppled and spilled across a sheaf of parchment. "Gods be damned," Robert roared. "You lied to me. You had the nerve to stand before me all these years, claiming some cheap lie about a tavern wench in the south, while you knew the truth of it all along." Ned stood, calm despite the tremor in his hands, as he tried to maintain composure. He spoke quietly, but his voice carried the iron of the North. "My liege, you must listen. Don't you dare my liege me, Ned," Robert shouted. "Tell me if it's true. Tell me if the boy is a Targaryen, the spawn of that silver-haired princeling who raped your sister." "Rhaegar did not rape Lyanna," Ned countered with a pained expression. "I have long believed they loved each other." It was not the reply Robert wanted to hear. His face contorted, an ugly mask of rage mingling with shock. "He kidnapped her. He dishonored her. If you seek to blacken her memory with foolish tales of romance, I'll—" He did not finish. The words died in his throat, replaced by a choking fury. For a moment, Ned thought Robert might strike him. But the king's fists merely clenched at his sides as if warring with the impulse. Ned held the king's gaze, though he felt his heart thunder within his chest. "I kept Jon's parentage secret to protect him," Ned began, his voice quiet but resolute. "Had you known he was Rhaegar's son, your hatred would have seen him put to the sword, or others would have tried to use him. Either way, he would not have lived. I swore to Lyanna on her deathbed that I would keep him safe." Robert stepped back, as if physically struck by the confession. The mention of Lyanna's deathbed vow ripped open old wounds. For years, Robert had cherished the image of Lyanna as the bright flower of the North, cruelly taken from him. He had idolized her, built half his reason for fighting the rebellion on her supposed defilement. Hearing that she had loved Rhaegar Targaryen was like hearing a monstrous falsehood, or at least something that would fracture the foundation of all he had believed. "You lied to me," he repeated, his voice lower now but hardly calmer. "All these years, my best friend." His eyes brimmed with both fury and a deep, wounded grief. Ned took a steadying breath. "I would have done it again. Jon is innocent. He knows nothing of this, and he never asked to be born. Lyanna wanted to spare him the wrath of the Iron Throne and your vengeance. You know as well as I, if the realm discovered a living Targaryen, there would be outcry, calls for his head. You might even have joined that outcry." Robert let out a bark of bitter laughter. "Might have? I promised the realm there would be no Targaryens left, man, woman, or babe." He leaned on Ned's desk, staring at him, nostrils flaring. So, Jon Snow is the child of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. My gods, Ned. My gods. Everything I've believed. He trailed off, as if struggling to find words enough to express the betrayal, the heartbreak, the hate. How could you? After all we've been through, after all I lost. Because I loved my sister, Ned said quietly, and I love that boy like a son. He is a good lad, Robert. Not the monster you imagine when you hear the name Targaryen. Robert pounded his fist once more, though with less force, as if all the vigor was draining from him. He has dragon's blood in his veins, and the realm must never know. If it does, war will rip it apart. House Baratheon, House Lannister, House Stark, even House Tyrell or Greyjoy, everyone would be forced to choose a side. Some might even rally to him, thinking him the rightful heir. He spat the words like venom. Ned said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. At length, Robert straightened, surveying Ned with cold calculation. Your silence is your admission that you still plan to shield him, yes? That is why you did not tell me. Ned nodded. Yes, your grace. And in that moment, the word grace felt awkward on his tongue. He saw the heartbreak flicker behind Robert's eyes, behind the fury. Their brotherhood, so tested by war and adversity, now wavered at a precipice. I will not let him die for a war he did not start. Robert slammed a hand to his brow, wiping the sweat that beaded there. And you truly believe you can hide this forever? My gods, Ned, Varys probably already knows if he hasn't guessed. The spider's whispers catch everything. Baelish might already be counting coins in the boy's name. The king's voice shook with frantic energy. I have half a mind to call the Kingsguard in here and have them drag you to the dungeons until you tell me where the boy is. But I know exactly where the boy is. He's at the wall wearing black. Not so unreachable after all. I could have him seized, brought down in chains, or put to the sword. Ned's face went white. He clenched his own fists. In all the years he had served Robert, he had never threatened his friend, but now he felt the impulse. If you do that, Ned said, his tone low and dangerous, you will lose me and all the North. We have bent the knee to you out of love and loyalty. Robert, if you harm Jon, there will be no more love or loyalty from Winterfell. Robert's breath came in ragged gasps. The silence lengthened, each man assessing the other. Old memories flickered between them. The days in the Vale, training under Jon Arryn's watchful eye, the rebellion that had toppled the Targaryen dynasty, the wedding at which Robert was crowned by half the realm's lords, the battles fought side by side. And now, in this solar, something threatened to tear them apart forever. Gods, Robert whispered, finally tearing his gaze away. Leave me, Ned. Go. I have no desire to look at you. His voice was heavy with a pain that he could not conceal. But do not leave King's Landing. I will have need of your counsel. Then, with a visible effort, he added, perhaps we can find a way to keep peace. Though it was not a promise, it was something other than outright condemnation. Ned bowed stiffly, his chest tight with guilt and relief in equal measure. He left the solar, hearing Robert's ragged breathing echo in the small space behind him. The door closed, and Ned felt the weight of the king's anguish as tangibly as if it were draped across his own shoulders. In the corridors, Ned made his way past gawking courtiers and page boys who scattered like mice. He found the hush of the open air in the courtyard and took a moment to steady himself. How quickly it all could come undone. Even after all these years, the truth was as potent as wildfire. He silently prayed that Robert's anger would cool, that the friendship they shared would be strong enough to weather the storm. But doubt gnawed at him. Robert's hatred for Targaryens was legendary, and Jon was precisely what Robert loathed. Ned felt powerless to protect the boy, and the desire to rush north, to place himself at the wall, flickered in his thoughts. But duty chained him here. He was hand of the king, and the realm needed him. Jon would have to rely on the secrecy of the Night's Watch for the time being. Later that evening, Robert sought his own counsel from a different quarter. In the shadows of the royal chambers, the candlelight flickered against gold-trimmed walls while Queen Cersei Lannister regarded her husband with narrowed, calculating eyes. Robert had dismissed the servants and guards, leaving only her and a flagon of strong wine to keep him company. She saw how he paced, how he rubbed at his brow, eyes bloodshot either from anger or drink. "And what has gotten you so riled, husband?" she asked, her voice smooth but edged with curiosity. She made no attempt to hide the faint condescension that crept into her tone. He said nothing at first, draining a goblet as though it might cool the heat in his veins. But the drink only made him more volatile. At last he turned to her. "Have you heard anything strange, Cersei, about Stark's bastard? Or perhaps you already know." Cersei arched an eyebrow. "What curiosity! Eddard Stark's whelp is at the wall, taking vows of the Night's Watch, if I recall." She was too practiced in court intrigue to betray her knowledge if she had any. And indeed, certain rumors had brushed her ears, but none so inflammatory as what Robert implied now. Robert studied her face, unsure if he could trust his own wife. Their marriage was a formality, a necessity of alliance rather than genuine affection. In another time, he might have confided in her, but he had never trusted the Lannisters, nor did he think Cersei capable of subtlety where Targaryens were concerned. "Just keep your ears open, woman," he muttered sourly. "If you hear any mention of that boy's lineage, come to me first. Am I understood?" The Queen offered him a thin smile. "Of course, Robert. I live only to serve you and our children." Her tone was sweet, almost mocking. She would not press him too far, but her mind was already turning. She sensed that Stark's bastard was more important than she had thought. Meanwhile, in a different wing of the Red Keep, Lord Varys glided through the corridors like a whisper, robed in soft silk that barely rustled. He had watchers everywhere, little birds who sang their songs of secrets. He knew the king had confronted Lord Stark. He knew tempers had flared. He also had pieces of the truth, though he did not yet have the full tapestry. The possibility that Jon Snow was Rhaegar Targaryen's heir made his heart race with excitement and dread. Varys lived for the realm, or so he claimed, but secrets were his currency, and this was the grandest secret of all. If properly leveraged, it could transform the entire power structure in the Seven Kingdoms. It was a secret that could bring war, or it might be used to maintain a precarious peace. How to balance those possibilities was something the Spider would contemplate deeply. Over the next few days, King Robert turned sullen. He barked orders, snapped at servants, and avoided Ned Stark, who busied himself with the daily duties of the hand, listening to the city's grievances, meeting with the Master of Coin, and attempting to maintain a semblance of normalcy. The tension in the air was palpable. Many suspected something had happened, but few could guess the enormity of it. Yet Robert could not avoid Ned forever. Eventually, pressing matters required them both to sit in council. The lords assembled around a long table. Varys, Littlefinger, Grand Maester Pycelle, and Lord Renly Baratheon, among others. The talk drifted to the usual concerns: tournament expenses, trade tariffs from the free cities, renewed skirmishes with raiders on the Dornish marches. Yet the tension between the king and his hand was evident in the curt words they exchanged. Near the meeting's end, Littlefinger, ever the opportunist, decided to broach a provocative topic. "Your Grace," he said, a slight smirk curling his lips, "there have been rumors stirring about certain matters related to your recent displeasure. I wonder if you would like us to look into them? Silence certain tongues before they wag too freely." Robert's gaze flickered, and the council members picked up on his mood. Ned, who sat across the table, tensed. He wondered if Robert might let slip the secret, or if the king had the presence of mind to keep it to himself. Robert's face hardened, and he turned on Littlefinger with a scowl. "I'll not have you or any man meddling in things beyond their station, Baelish. If rumors are stirring, I'll handle them." Baelish inclined his head, unruffled. "Of course, Your Grace, only trying to be helpful." He cast a sidelong glance at Lord Stark, who showed no reaction. But Peter Baelish knew better than to believe there was nothing simmering beneath that stoic exterior. Once the council was dismissed, Robert asked Ned to remain behind. The tension in the chamber was thick as the other members left. The gold cloaks who stood guard had the sense to give the two men distance. Once alone, Robert sank into his seat, a man exhausted by too many burdens. Ned waited, hands clasped, refusing to fidget. "I have been thinking," Robert began, voice low and weary. "We swore brotherhood once, you and I, before the gods and men. We bled together in the rebellion, and you have served me as hand with honor. I value that even now." Ned dipped his head in acknowledgement. "That means a great deal, Robert. You know I have always followed my honor, though it brought us to this pass." Robert said grimly, "and I have come to a decision. The boy is at the wall, living a life of service and hardship. By all the gods, that is punishment enough. I cannot see the good in dragging him down here to execute him for who his father was. Perhaps it would be more dangerous to do so than to let him linger in obscurity. Anyway, if there were an heir, a Targaryen claimant in the world, folks would rally and fight. But a nameless bastard wearing black is no threat. That is what I will tell the realm if it ever comes to that. That is what I will tell myself." Ned closed his eyes briefly, relief flooding him. "You have my gratitude, my king. Jon is no threat to you, I promise. He has never once spoken of any desire for a throne, nor does he even know the truth of his parentage." Robert eyed him carefully. "He doesn't know? By the gods, that might be the only thing that will keep him safe. A man who doesn't know his birthright cannot claim it." Ned nodded. "He has always believed I dishonored myself with another woman. It pains me, but that was the only lie that could shield him from men like those who slaughtered Elia Martell's children." Robert's face hardened at the reminder of that cruel deed. The mountain and his men. That was war, but a vile piece of it indeed. He paused, looking into Ned's eyes. "See that you keep this secret buried, Ned. If he ever reappears proclaiming the name Targaryen, I will have no choice but to respond. And I will not respond kindly." Ned acknowledged the warning. They parted with an unsteady truce. Word drifted to Cersei in fragments, gleaned from eavesdropping on Robert's half-drunken rants and bits of conversation overheard by her servants. She pieced together enough to conclude that Ned Stark's bastard might be of Targaryen blood. That made Jon Snow not merely an inconvenience but a possible claimant, if the realm ever learned the truth. The Queen saw in this a potential threat to her own children, especially Joffrey, who was already a proud, volatile boy. But she was no fool. She sensed that Robert was reluctant to stir a conflict. Ned Stark was widely respected, beloved by the North, and if Robert went after Stark's so-called bastard, only to discover that half the realm might rise to defend him if they believed he had Targaryen blood, well, it could mean civil war. Yet Cersei's mind churned. She contemplated ways to twist this secret to her advantage. If the king was not willing to remove the threat, perhaps she could arrange it. But caution stayed her hand. If she acted prematurely, Robert might see it as betrayal, or Ned might suspect her involvement. Better to lie in wait, to see if the rumor spread, to strike when the moment was ripe. Months passed in this uneasy equilibrium. Jon remained at the wall, oblivious. Ned continued his duties in King's Landing, and Robert struggled with his rage and his cup, seeking solace in hunting, feasting, and women. The secret weighed on both men like an anvil hidden beneath a cloak. They rarely spoke of it, but the tension lingered. One day, a raven from Castle Black arrived, bearing troubling news of wildling raids and ominous signs beyond the wall. Ned carried the scroll to the king, reading aloud the words of Lord Commander Mormont. He noted that Jon Snow had become the Lord Commander's steward, and that he showed promise, a sense of honor, intelligence, and courage that reminded the old bear of Ned Stark himself. Robert listened, mask-like, absorbing the mention of the boy he could never quite forget. Even in the secrecy of his chambers, he said nothing of Jon's true parentage, but Ned saw how his hands tightened around the arms of his chair. "What do you propose we do?" Robert finally asked, his tone carefully neutral. Ned answered as the hand. "We must see to the needs of the Night's Watch, Your Grace. Supplies, men. Winter is coming, and they have fewer swords every year." Robert stroked his beard. An old habit he had revived now that his belly grew thicker and his patience thinner. Very well, we will allocate some resources. I will not risk wildlings pouring over the wall. The realm has enough troubles as it is. Ned inclined his head and departed. As he left, he felt a wave of gratitude toward Robert for not seizing upon the mention of Jon. Yet gratitude was tempered by the knowledge that one day, this fragile peace might shatter. Another test came when rumors began to swirl in the streets of King's Landing about a Targaryen bride overseas. Whispers of Daenerys Targaryen and her brother Viserys circulated, suggesting that the last living Targaryens were in the Free Cities, gathering support to reclaim the Iron Throne. Robert reacted to these rumors with open hatred. It was no secret he had offered bounties for their heads. In the small council, he spoke passionately about ending the Targaryen line once and for all. He raged that Daenerys intended to wed a Dothraki warlord, forming an alliance that could bring savage horse lords across the narrow sea. He frothed at the mouth about cutting off the snake's head before it could strike. Ned argued caution, as he had in the books of prophecy that never existed in Robert's mind. Slaying a girl across the sea who has not stepped foot in Westeros may only feed the legend of House Targaryen, he counseled. If she comes, then let us face her. But to dispatch assassins would be an evil stain on the realm, one we might come to regret. Robert would hear none of it. I want them dead, he roared. No Targaryen will threaten my reign or the safety of my people. Those words were a knife to Ned's heart. He was painfully reminded that Robert's hatred of Targaryens was near limitless. If he would kill Daenerys in a faraway land, how much more easily would he kill Jon, once he lost his compunction? Still, the council remained divided, some supporting Ned's stance of caution, others supporting the king's desire for a swift end to any Targaryen threat. Varys, for his part, offered vague commentary, emphasizing the complexities of assassinating a princess under the protection of a Dothraki Khalasar. Peter Baelish claimed to have contacts who could arrange it for the right price. In the end, Robert ordered Varys to make inquiries, and Ned stormed out, his stomach twisted in knots. That night, Ned wrote a coded letter to the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, urging him to keep an extra eye on Jon's well-being. He could not bring himself to reveal the reason, but he knew too well how quickly Robert's hatred could burn. Despite these tensions, life in King's Landing carried on. The city bustled, gold dragons changed hands in the marketplace, and the nobles engaged in their petty rivalries. Sansa Stark continued her lessons, daydreaming of a glorious future. Arya Stark, restless and bold, practiced her needlework of a different sort. Bran and Rickon remained at Winterfell, safe from the swirling intrigues of the capital. Caitlyn, too, endured an uneasy watchfulness, sensing something amiss between her husband and the king but unable to place it. Occasionally, Robert would make a half-hearted attempt at reconciliation with Ned, inviting him to a hunt or a feast. They would share old stories, laugh at memories from the rebellion, and for a moment, it felt as if the rift was healed. Then Robert would grow quiet, and Ned would see the shadow of the secret crossing the king's face. It was a splinter in Robert's mind. No matter how deeply he tried to bury it, the knowledge that he had been deceived and that a Targaryen still lived gnawed at him. Matters took a darker turn when a new rumor sparked within the Red Keep. Someone whispered that Jon Snow's mother was not a fisherman's daughter or a barmaid, but might have been highborn. The rumor was vague, but it set minds racing. There were enough rumors in King's Landing to fill a library, but this one struck close to Robert's hidden fears. He summoned Ned to his chambers late one night, brandishing a crumpled piece of paper upon which the rumor was written in a shaky hand. "They say you never had a bastard at all," Robert growled. "They say it was your sister's child, fathered by a nameless lord. People are sniffing too closely around the truth, Ned. This must be stamped out." Ned felt ice in his veins. "Rumors come and go in this city, your grace. They say I fathered the boy with Aishera Dane or a dozen other women. None of it has been proven, nor will it be." Robert thrust the paper into the flames of the fireplace. "I want it gone. I will not have fools prying at this old wound. See to it, Ned. Use whatever means you must." Ned bristled at the command but nodded. "We cannot slaughter the realm for speaking, but I will find who started it and see that they are discredited. Is that enough?" The king stared into the dancing flames. "For now," he said, voice hollow. Then he glanced at Ned, eyes flickering with an odd combination of guilt and pleading. "I do not want to be forced to do something terrible, Ned. If the realm discovered the truth, I would have no choice. Do you understand me?" Ned's throat felt tight. "I understand." He left the king's chambers, the weight heavier than ever before. That night, Ned visited Peter Baelish in his modest yet cunningly appointed office near the treasury. Littlefinger received him with a sly grin, feigning surprise. "Lord Stark, to what do I owe the pleasure at this late hour?" Ned set his jaw. "Rumors have begun to circulate again about my bastard, Jon Snow. I will be blunt. I want them quashed, and you have the means to do so." Baelish leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together. "I may indeed. Information flows through my brothels like water. But rumor is not always so easy to kill, my lord. Often, trying to kill a rumor only gives it new life." "I need your help regardless," Ned insisted. "The king demands it." Peter's eyes sparkled with interest. "The king? How curious. Robert typically pays no heed to petty gossip. Perhaps there is more to this rumor than the usual chatter about Ash Aradane." He waited, as if expecting Ned to slip up and reveal a crucial piece of truth. When Ned remained stony and silent, Baelish sighed theatrically. "Very well. I will see what I can do. It would help if I knew what precisely I am denying or twisting, but I suppose I can improvise." Ned grimaced but said nothing. In his heart, he loathed the idea of leaning on Baelish. Still, these were desperate times. The man's cunning was needed if they were to keep Jon safe. He thanked Littlefinger tersely, left a small purse of gold for expenses, and exited. As he walked back to the Tower of the Hand, he felt unclean. It did not take long for Baelish to spin new gossip that overshadowed the rumors of Jon Snow's mysterious parentage. A scandal about a wealthy merchant's wife and a Kingsguard knight quickly occupied the city's attention, helped along by bribes and cunning insinuations whispered in all the right ears. The rumor about Jon faded to the background. For now, at least that secret was contained. Yet the fragile peace between the king and his hand grew more brittle with every passing moon. Robert's tormented feelings about the Targaryen boy festered. He found reasons to avoid Ned, reasons to go on extended hunts. His nights were spent in drunken revelry, a means to numb the conflict in his soul. He was a man haunted by regrets. The loss of Lyanna, the realization that she might not have been as he imagined, and the knowledge that her child lived, carrying the bloodline he had sworn to extinguish. Each time Robert looked at Ned, he saw the reflection of that betrayal. Meanwhile, beyond the wall, Jon Snow lived in ignorance of the drama swirling around his name. He rose before dawn, trained, mucked out stables, listened to Ser Alliser Thorne's taunts, and tried to befriend Samwell Tarly. He had his own burdens. White Walkers were the stuff of old tales, but the chill in the air felt unnatural, and stories from wildling prisoners spoke of an emerging threat in the far north. Jon's dreams were filled with wolves and crypts, and he wondered about his place in the world. He believed himself a bastard of Eddard Stark, which already weighed on him like a chain. Never once did he imagine that the blood of dragons coursed through his veins. Back in King's Landing, an unexpected visitor arrived. Ser Jorah Mormont, the exiled knight who had once served Ned Stark's father. He had come bearing urgent tidings from across the narrow sea regarding Daenerys Targaryen. He brought news that she was with child, carrying the future heir of the Dothraki Call, and that Viserys Targaryen was dead. Ser Jorah, seeking a royal pardon, disclosed everything he had witnessed. Robert's fury was immediate. He demanded once more that the council arrange for assassins to kill the Targaryen girl and her unborn child. Ned stood alone against the idea, calling it murder most foul. "It is monstrous," Ned said, almost shouting in the council chamber. "Killing a pregnant girl because of her name? That is not the act of a just king." Robert's face twisted. Just king? Were Aerys Targaryen's acts just? He burned my brother-in-law, murdered my father's friends, kidnapped your sister, butchered Rickard Stark. That is the Targaryen legacy, Ned. And I will see it ended before it can threaten my realm again. Ned pressed on. Your father was burned alive by the Mad King, but your hatred for all Targaryens blinds you, Robert. Enough innocents have died. Robert slammed his fist on the table. I will do what must be done. It is my duty as king to protect this realm from the scum of House Targaryen. I will sign the order for her death. If my hand refuses to carry it out, then so be it. In that moment, Ned understood there was no swaying Robert. The memory of Jon Snow rose unbidden in his mind. This is why you can never know, Jon, he thought bitterly. Because of Robert's burning hatred for all your kin. Furious and disillusioned, Ned resigned as hand on the spot. He stood before the council, removed the heavy chain of office from his neck, and placed it on the table. I will not be party to murder, he declared. You must find another hand who will do your bidding. Robert was stunned. For a heartbeat, he looked lost, as if Ned's resignation was a fresh betrayal. Then his face hardened with pride. Go then, he snapped. I'll find a man with the stomach for the job. You were always too honorable, Ned. Too stiff-necked to see the real world. Go back to your frozen wasteland. With that, Ned departed. He had already decided he would take his daughters north, returning to Winterfell. Jon was safe enough at the wall, though he worried that this news of Targaryen threat might stoke Robert's rage further. With Daenerys' child in the mix, the king might grow fearful of all Targaryens, rumored or real. Ned had only one course left. Remove himself from the poisonous environment of King's Landing and hope that Robert's promise to leave Jon alone remained intact. Yet fate would not allow a clean break. That night, Ned Stark received an urgent summons from Petyr Baelish, who claimed that he had vital information regarding the Targaryens. Against his better judgment, Ned agreed to meet him by the waterside, near the city's stinking canals. Cloaked in darkness, Ned arrived to find Baelish waiting on a small boat. The murky water lapped against the hull. I heard you resigned, Littlefinger said softly, his tone regretful. A shame. I rather enjoyed watching you navigate these waters like a stubborn ship pilot. But there is something you should know before you depart. Ned folded his arms. Get on with it. Baelish ran a hand along the boat's edge. The rumor about your bastard has gained traction again. Only in a different form. Certain highborn lords are starting to whisper that Rhaegar Targaryen might have left a child behind. Varys and I, for our own reasons, have been trying to manage these whispers. But it's getting out of hand. Ned's heart thudded. How did such whispers start? A few old lords still remember Rhaegar's interest in Lyanna, how they vanished together. Some claim a child was conceived. The reasoning goes that Rhaegar was a romantic, so of course he would consummate the love that cost him a kingdom. Littlefinger shrugged. Whether they know it's Jon Snow or not, they are circling dangerously close to the truth. If you leave now, you will not be here to quell these rumors. They might spread like wildfire. Ned ground his teeth. Baelish, if any harm comes to Jon through these rumors. Petyr raised a hand. I have no wish to see the boy harmed. I simply want you to understand that your departure will remove one of the biggest barriers to the rumor taking flight. Your presence here, quiet and watchful, has kept the rumor from exploding. If you leave, well, who knows how the king might react if it becomes public that Rhaegar's heir has been hidden under his nose. Ned stared at the water, fighting the urge to throw Baelish into it. What are you proposing? Oh, nothing so direct, Baelish said with a thin smile. But it may benefit you to have an ally in King's Landing who can steer conversations, by silence, misdirect inquiries. My services remain at your disposal, for a modest fee, of course. Ned hated the notion. Trusting Baelish was like trusting a pit viper. Yet he saw the necessity. Fine, he said at last, grudgingly. I will do what I can to ensure you are compensated. But if I catch you using this secret for your own gain. Petyr placed a hand over his heart, feigning insult. Lord Stark, I live to serve. Ned left that meeting boiling with anger and anxiety. The next morning, he informed his household they would depart for Winterfell within a day's time. Sansa cried at the thought of leaving the city, her illusions of becoming a queen by marrying Joffrey not yet broken. Arya felt relief, for she disliked the south and yearned to run free in the north again. Caitlyn was worried, sensing that something grave had transpired but trusting Ned's judgment. Before they could depart, King Robert summoned Ned once more. This time it was in private, in the small courtyard beneath a gnarled weirwood that had once been tended by the Targaryens. Robert was sober, his face haggard. "So you're leaving," he said, voice subdued. "Will you not serve as hand, Ned? The realm needs you." Ned bowed stiffly. "I cannot carry out these orders of yours, Robert. I will not. And I cannot stand by and watch you send knives across the sea to kill a young girl and her unborn child." Robert let out a pained sigh. "If you stay, I'll consider your counsel on the matter." "You said that before," Ned answered quietly. "But your heart is set on blood, and so is your counsel's. You want me to sign off on murder. I will not do it." Robert's hands shook, and he shoved them behind his back. "You're making me the villain, Ned. Perhaps I am, but I did not start this war. Aerys Targaryen did, and Rhaegar followed. They took everything from me, and here you stand, protecting his whelp." Ned set his jaw. "Jon Snow is more Stark than Targaryen. If you knew him, you would see that. He's done nothing to deserve your wrath. Daenerys, either, has done nothing but be born to the wrong name." The king's eyes brimmed with tears of frustration. "Then go. Go, Ned, if you must. But remember this. If war comes because of Targaryen claimants, don't blame me for doing what must be done to protect my throne. Don't blame me for seeing that no more Targaryen heads rise. Make no mistake, if your precious bastard boy dares claim that name, or if the realm discovers the truth and demands a king of Targaryen blood, I will put him down. We are too far along this path to turn back." Ned said nothing. He bowed once profoundly, a gesture of respect and sorrow. Then he turned on his heel and left. They departed King's Landing that very afternoon, slipping out under a cloudy sky. Ned, Caitlyn, Sansa, and Arya with a modest retinue of guards. The tension in the city was so thick that leaving felt like escaping a tinderbox. Along the King's Road, Ned kept glancing north, longing to reach the safety of Winterfell. Yet in his heart, he felt no relief, only dread. The knowledge that Robert had come so close to unleashing his wrath on Jon was a constant reminder of the boy's peril. With rumors swirling, with a pregnant Targaryen across the sea, with Robert's hatred burning unabated, the slightest spark could ignite civil war. And so the Starks traveled north, through the Riverlands, pausing briefly at Riverrun, where Caitlyn's family greeted them with warmth. Ned confided in Hoster Tully only that there was tension with the king. He did not reveal the terrible secret. From there, they pressed on, mindful of the approach of winter winds. The further they traveled, the more Ned felt the pull of the north, the land that shaped his identity. But behind them, in the south, a storm gathered. In King's Landing, King Robert brooded, drinking more heavily than ever, vacillating between bursts of camaraderie and dark moods. He confided less and less in Cersei, who watched him with cold eyes, waiting to see if she might glean any further secrets about this rumored Targaryen bastard. Varys continued his subtle manipulations. Littlefinger sowed confusion and reaped coin. Renly Baratheon pondered the future, and the common folk gossiped about royals, knights, and wars to come, oblivious to the lethal secret that could tear the realm apart. Time slipped by. Messages came from the Wall, updates about wildling movements and the comings and goings at Castle Black. Ned was relieved to read that Jon Snow had taken to his vows diligently, that he was proving himself a capable young man. Ned wrote him letters of encouragement, never hinting at the truth of his birth. He knew that truth must remain sealed, for if ever it came out, Robert would not hesitate to end Jon's life. But the tide of events in Westeros could not be halted by Ned's departure alone. Daenerys Targaryen bore a son in the Dothraki Sea, only to lose him under bloody circumstances. Her call, Drogo, suffered a grievous wound, leading to a tragic spiral that left Daenerys a widow, with only a few loyal followers. Rumors spoke of dragons hatching amid funeral pyres, tales so outlandish many dismissed them as sailors' fantasies. Robert, however, heard them and grew pale with fear and fury. He demanded further intelligence, cursing the day House Targaryen ever existed. He might have mounted an invasion of the Dothraki Sea himself if not for the counsel that the Dothraki would never cross the sea in force. For all his bluster, Robert was aging, slowing, and weighed down by a kingdom in debt. The cost of tournaments, feasts, and a lavish court had nearly emptied the royal coffers. Tywin Lannister, father of the Queen, loomed large as a creditor whose gold propped up the Iron Throne. Even so, Robert refused to lower his standard of living or his hunts. On a fateful day in late summer, the king went boar hunting, drunk on strong wine provided by his squire. The details were murky, but a boar gored him, leaving him mortally wounded. By the time he was carried back to the Red Keep, the king's life was ebbing away. On his deathbed, with Grand Maester Pycelle trying feebly to tend him, Robert beckoned to Lord Renly and Ser Barristan Selmy. In rambling words, he confessed to regrets, chief among them, his rancor over Lyanna, the bloodshed of the rebellion, and the continued existence of Targaryen heirs. He cursed Daenerys, lamented that he had not been able to end her line. In his delirium, he even mentioned Ned's boy at the wall. The watchers exchanged puzzled glances. Yet Robert did not elaborate, lost in fever dreams of the past and present. He breathed his last, leaving behind a power vacuum in King's Landing. Queen Cersei moved swiftly, installing Joffrey as king. Renly fled, planning his own moves. Stannis, the eldest of Robert's brothers, prepared to press his claim. War loomed on the horizon, fueled by ambition, pride, and hidden truths. At Winterfell, Ned received word of Robert's death with a heavy heart. Despite their recent rift, Robert had been a brother to him, a man he once loved like family. The guilt and sorrow pressed on Ned, for he had not been there in Robert's final moments. Rumors flew north about the chaos in King's Landing, of Joffrey's crowning, of Stannis' letters proclaiming himself the rightful king and denouncing Joffrey's parentage, of Renly mustering forces in the Reach through his alliance with the Tyrells. The realm fractured, with lords choosing sides. Not for the first time, Ned worried that the truth of Jon's parentage might be used as yet another banner under which men would fight. If Stannis, for example, learned of a Targaryen heir at the Wall, would he not attempt to remove the threat? If Renly discovered it, would he exploit it to weaken Joffrey's claim? In the chaos, letters became fewer. Varys and Baelish had their own concerns with the ongoing War of the Five Kings, as it was being called. Ned tried to remain neutral, declaring for none in the immediate sense, for he saw the best hope in trying to keep the North stable, especially with rumors that Greyjoys might again stir in rebellion. Yet soon enough, the North was dragged into the conflict when the Lannisters marched on the Riverlands. Hostilities brewed, and Ned's son Robb was called upon to lead armies. The young wolf was forced to claim the king in the North title after certain outrages were committed by Joffrey, including the execution of men loyal to House Stark. The realm erupted in blood and steel. Far away on the Wall, Jon Snow faced threats of an entirely different nature. White Walkers began to stir, and the Watch needed every able-bodied man to defend the realms of men. Jon heard rumors of war below, of kings crowning themselves, of chaos swallowing the Seven Kingdoms. He knew his father had returned north, and he worried. But he also had a duty to his brothers of the Night's Watch. Strangely, he sometimes felt as if a greater destiny whispered to him in the cold wind, though he could not name it. The war in the south burned fiercely. Battles raged between Lannister, Stark, Baratheon, and Tyrell forces. Amid the shifting allegiances, the name Targaryen occasionally surfaced, especially as news of dragons in the east grew more substantiated. Yet the notion of a Targaryen bastard at the Wall remained a distant, half-forgotten rumor. Robert's death had halted much of the impetus behind hunting that secret. Those lords who suspected the truth either died in the war, or they realized that the new powers, Joffrey, Stannis, Renly, had bigger concerns than chasing rumors of a black-clad bastard. And Eddard Stark gave no sign that he harbored any secret. As the war ground on, Winter's bite grew sharper, and attentions turned to more immediate threats. Still, the ghost of that secret lingered. On a bitterly cold morning, Ned stood atop the ramparts of Winterfell. The castle had changed hands briefly during the war, but the Starks reclaimed it, battered yet unbroken. Ned watched the snow drift across the courtyard, thinking of Jon. He thought of Lyanna, whose ashes lay in the crypts below. He remembered her dying request, "Promise me, Ned." He had fulfilled that promise, though it had cost him dearly in guilt and discord with Robert. Yet Jon was alive. In these harsh times, that alone was a small miracle. Ned's breath formed clouds in the cold air, and he whispered a silent prayer to the old gods. Let the boy remain safe upon the wall. Let no one ever discover who he truly is. Let him serve the realm in peace. Beyond the moors and forests, the War of the Five Kings continued to rage, each faction convinced of its own righteousness. In the east, Daenerys Targaryen nursed her dragons and gathered strength, preparing to someday cross the narrow sea. The world was in flux, and prophecies spoke of a long night, of ice and fire. And in that swirling tumult, Jon Snow stood at a unique crossroads, oblivious to the fact that he was both wolf and dragon. Had King Robert lived long enough, the hidden truth might have dragged the Seven Kingdoms into yet another war, for the Baratheon king would have felt honor-bound to destroy the Targaryen line in any form. But fate had other designs, and Robert's deathbed regrets did not translate into final edicts. In the final reckoning, Robert Baratheon's discovery had threatened to plunge the realm into chaos sooner, had threatened Jon's life, and severed the great friendship between the king and his hand. Yet it also granted Ned Stark a chance to reaffirm his most sacred vow, to protect Lyanna's son. Robert, in his complexity, had vacillated between hatred and the faint memory of brotherhood. And in the end, it was Robert's love for Ned that stayed the sword, at least temporarily. War came for other reasons, from other ambitions, and the dark truth of Jon's lineage receded once more into the shadows. As the realm bled, men rarely asked questions that might open more wounds. One day, the truth might yet surface, and in that day, the Seven Kingdoms would reckon with the living legacy of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. But for now, in a realm beset by war, the child of ice and fire wore black upon the wall, unknowing, serving as a shield against the night. And if any old ghosts lingered in the Red Keep's halls, whispering of the secret that King Robert had stumbled upon, they found no purchase in a land already drowning in blood and crowns. Such was the shift of fate when Robert Baratheon discovered Ned Stark's secret while he still lived. It was a precarious knowledge, one that might have destroyed them all had events played out differently. But in the swirl of ambition, vengeance, and the unstoppable march of winter, the Targaryen secret remained, for the moment, safely hidden beneath the snows of the far north. Whether that secrecy was a mercy or a curse was a question left for the distant future, when the songs of ice and fire would finally reach their climax and the destiny of Jon Snow would be laid bare for all the realm to see. In the cold light of dawn, a hush lay over Winterfell's courtyard. Smoke curled lazily from the chimneys, and frost glittered in pale rays of sunlight. Outside the gate, the King's Road stretched south, where war raged among the great houses. Within the keep, Lord Eddard Stark rose from a restless sleep. His dreams had been full of memories of Robert, whose death still haunted him. No matter their final quarrel, Robert had been family in all but name. Yet the war that followed the king's passing had little room for private grief. Ned slipped from his bed, careful not to wake Caitlyn, who in her exhaustion clung to a few precious moments of peace. He dressed himself in modest woolen breeches and a doublet embroidered with the dire wolf of House Stark, then made his way out to the ramparts. A crisp northern wind nipped at his cheeks. He breathed in the chill, grateful in a strange way to be back in his own land, even if the realm beyond the neck was in chaos. By the gods, how quickly everything had changed. Another king sat the Iron Throne, Joffrey Baratheon, Robert's supposed son, but in truth the product of Queen Cersei's incest with her twin, Jaime. Renly Baratheon had raised his own banner, only to meet a queer fate in the south. Stannis Baratheon claimed the throne by law and letters, and Robb Stark, Ned's son, had been proclaimed king in the north by loyal bannermen after the Lannisters committed atrocities against Stark men and the Tullis of Riverrun. Ned had done all he could to keep the north together. He had tried to counsel caution, to avoid any brazen acts, yet the flood of events had swept them all into the maelstrom. Even Winterfell had briefly fallen to treachery, Theon Greyjoy's misguided seizure, though it was now back in Stark hands. Ned still bristled at the memory of Theon's betrayal. The boy Ned had warded for years turned on them at the Greyjoys' urging. That, at least, was behind them for the moment, though the cost had been dear. He looked north, imagining the wall's towering presence, imagining the boy he had raised as his own. Jon Snow remained up there, wearing the black of the Night's Watch, locked in that eternal vigil. Jon did not know the secret of his birth, did not know that he was no bastard at all but the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. If ever the rumor gained real traction in the south, Ned feared for Jon's life. With Robert dead, some might think the danger lessened, but Ned knew better. Robert's memory lingered in the laws he made and the hatreds he inspired. Beyond that, other powers could seize on Jon's existence. If Tywin Lannister or one of the Baratheon brothers, or even the Tyrells learned that a Targaryen lived in the north, the war might spiral into an even crueler shape. The realm was already in tatters. Ned would do whatever he must to keep that rumor smothered. He closed his eyes, letting the wind carry his silent prayer. Jon, stay safe, do your duty, ask no questions. Let no one guess at the truth. For your sake and for the sake of the realm. When he descended into the great hall, the warmth from the hearth greeted him, along with the smells of fresh bread and boiled oats. Servants bowed. Caitlyn was already there, seated at the high table, pale but composed. She'd been reading a missive that had just arrived by Raven. Ned saw how her knuckles whitened on the parchment. "What is it?" he asked gently, crossing to her side. She handed him the letter. "It's from Lord Hoster's Maester. Riverrun is under siege again. The Lannisters regrouped after their losses and have drawn a tight cordon. Edmure is holding them off for the moment, but they are outnumbered. The letter begs for aid." She paused, trying to keep her composure. "Ned, that is my home." He set the parchment down, feeling the old familiar weight of duty. "Robb will be near the twins now or marching south. We must send what men we can spare to bolster the Tully forces." Caitlyn nodded, though worry dulled her eyes. "With the Iron Islanders harassing our coasts, the north is stretched thin already." Ned lowered his voice, aware of the servants scurrying back and forth. "I will speak to Wyman Manderly and the Glovers. We must do something. The Lannisters will not relent. They want the Tullys subdued. That will put them that much closer to Winterfell and the entire north." Caitlyn reached out to grip his hand. "We must also consider going south ourselves, Ned, to see Hoster. He is ill. I have stayed here for your sake, but—" he squeezed her hand in return. "It is too dangerous for both of us to leave Winterfell. Though if it will ease your mind, I'll send you with an escort of loyal men to Riverrun. I must remain here to keep the north together." She managed a small nod. "If that is how it must be done, then so be it." They spoke a bit more of practicalities. How many men might be spared, which roads were safe, which bannermen remained loyal. War had fragmented old alliances in ways no one could have foreseen. Ned noticed that in all their talk of Lannisters, Greyjoys, and petty lords, neither mentioned the name Targaryen. But the specter of that name weighed on his mind. Far away, Daenerys Targaryen was rumored to have hatched dragons. How or if that rumor was true, Ned could not say. But if it was, that alone might shift the tide of this war in an unimaginable way. He finished breaking his fast quickly, then sought out Maester Luwin to draft messages to Wyman Manderly and other northern lords. The day unfurled in a blur of strategy, planning, and instructions. Winterfell's yard echoed with the ring of steel, as new recruits practiced under Ser Roderick Castle's watchful eye. Meanwhile, Ned eyed the ravens in the rookery, waiting for tidings from Robb. He missed his boy fiercely but knew that, as king in the north, Robb had found his own path, one of endless battle and uneasy alliances. Night fell, cold and silent. Ned joined Caitlyn in their chambers, where she shed tears for her father and brother. He held her close, murmuring that they would do all that honor demanded. When at last she slept, he slipped away into the quiet corridors. A strange restlessness possessed him, a sense that events were building towards something vast. The meager torches along the walls cast flickering shadows that seemed alive with hidden threats. He descended to the crypts, carrying a single lantern. He passed beneath stone arches, through rows of old kings of winter and stark lords, carved effigies with stone wolves at their feet. At last, he reached Lyanna's tomb, a statue carved in her likeness, though it did not capture the fiery spirit she had possessed. A chill ran through Ned that had nothing to do with the draft. He remembered her last moments in the Tower of Joy, her body weak and drenched in fever sweat, her voice a whisper. "Promise me, Ned." She'd made him swear to protect her son, a Targaryen heir. That vow had defined so many of his choices, and it had nearly cost him everything. "I have kept him safe, Lyanna," he said under his breath, voice echoing faintly in the crypt. "Though the realm has become a cauldron of war, I only hope he can remain hidden." The darkness pressed in. He bowed his head in silence, then turned away, leaving the memories where they belonged, in the depths of Winterfell. High above the world, at Castle Black, Jon Snow found the days blending into nights. There was too much to do. The wildlings were stirring in greater numbers, Mance Rayder forging them into something resembling a unified host. Rumors trickled in of dead men walking, of strange pale creatures glimpsed in the snowdrifts. Most of the men of the Night's Watch refused to believe it, or if they believed, they pretended not to. Fear was a powerful force, and the Watch was already worn thin. Jon rubbed the back of Ghost's neck as the direwolf padded beside him. The great white wolf was silent, ears pricked, ever alert. That day, Jon had joined a scouting party led by Corn Halfhand beyond the wall, searching for signs of wildling encampments. They had found footprints, old campfires, scattered evidence that Mance's people were on the move. On the return, Jon felt a deep sense of foreboding he could not name. He had glimpsed the haunted forest stretched out like an endless gloom, a landscape that seemed to whisper warnings. Back inside the gate, he reported to Lord Commander Jeor Mormont. The old bear listened intently, nodding at intervals. "More of them than we thought," Mormont muttered, hands locked behind his back. "Well, we cannot muster reinforcements from the south. They're too busy killing each other." He turned to Jon, a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. "The realm would be better served if every man from Dorne to the Neck came to man the wall. But you and I both know that's not how men's hearts work." Jon agreed. The civil war that had erupted after King Robert's death held the Lord's attention. The Night's Watch was left to fend off wildlings and worse. A letter had come from Winterfell not long ago, penned by Lord Stark's hand. It spoke of the chaos in the south, the fracturing alliances, and the need for every house to defend itself. Reading it, Jon had felt pangs of guilt. Was he deserting his family by staying at the wall? But he reminded himself of his vow. "I am the sword in the darkness, the watcher on the walls, the shield that guards the realms of men." Yet sometimes, in the hush of midnight, he wondered if Lord Stark truly thought of him as a son or merely a burdensome bastard. Ned's letters were kind, but they never ventured beyond the realm of polite encouragement. They offered no mother's name, no clue to the boy's origins. Jon had grown resigned to never knowing. That evening, after supper in the drafty hall, Jon stood watch atop the wall itself. The world below was silent, distant torches pricking the darkness. A swirl of snow blew across his boots. He tried to imagine the scale of the war down there. Kings vying for the Iron Throne, armies clashing. What was it all for, when the true enemy might be massing north of the wall? He gripped the hilt of Longclaw, the Valyrian steel sword Lord Mormont had given him, and felt a flash of determination. Perhaps one day the realm would recall that the Night's Watch had protected them while they bickered over crowns. Far to the south, in King's Landing, the Iron Throne sat upon a dais of black marble, a grotesque mass of twisted swords. Joffrey Baratheon, though many whispered he was no Baratheon at all, lounged on it wearing a crown too large for his young head. Queen Cersei Lannister stood to one side, regal in green silk, while her father, Lord Tywin Lannister, stood to the other, expression cold as a tomb. The court was assembled for another day of pronouncements. The populace of King's Landing had grown hungry and desperate. War cut off supply routes. Grain had grown scarce. Anger simmered in the slums of Flea Bottom. Yet the Lannisters held the city with gold and swords, employing both lavishly. Their gold bought mercenaries, assassins, and informants. Their swords kept the people cowed. Even so, rumor slipped through cracks in the walls, rumor that, once upon a time, Robert Baratheon had discovered a Targaryen child in the north. The talk was hushed, uncertain. Some claimed the child had been killed years ago. Others said King Robert had wanted it dead, but Eddard Stark refused. Whispers circulated in wine sinks and among nervous lesser lords. Cersei had heard mention of it and, with a frown, demanded to know if Varys had any leads. The spider only smiled and said that no real evidence existed, merely the fancy of bored tongues. She watched him carefully but gleaned nothing more. Peter Baelish, too, had done his part to keep the rumor to an undercurrent. He continued to spread more salacious stories, of Sellsword companies turned brigand, of Tyrell men capturing bandit lords in the Reach, of all manner of petty outrages. The city devoured scandal as a starving dog devours scraps. Few fixated on the fleeting rumor that might implicate Eddard Stark. With Lord Stark in the north and the realm in turmoil, the secret was more easily contained. Littlefinger's advantage in such chaos was that he could use the rumor if it ever became useful leverage. Until then, he kept it in his back pocket, so to speak. In the Riverlands, the siege of Riverrun continued. Tywin Lannister had set loyal bannermen under his command to encircle the castle. They harried supply lines, burned fields, and starved the Tullis within. Edmure Tully stubbornly resisted. Caitlyn Stark arrived in secret with a small retinue, having braved side roads and discreet paths. The sight of her father, Hoster Tully, lying on his sickbed in the keep's highest tower, broke her heart. He was feverish, calling for her mother, for his lost wife, for old memories. Caitlyn held his hand, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Through a window slit, she glimpsed smoke from distant camps. The Lannisters would not yield. In time, supplies would run out. That very evening, Ned's reinforcements arrived. Some Manderley knights, a contingent of fierce men from Bear Island, and a host of archers from House Glover. Their presence emboldened Edmure, who launched a cunning night raid on one of the Lannister encampments, burning siege engines and cutting down half-asleep soldiers. It was a small victory, but a significant one. The next day, Caitlyn stood on the walls, watching the charred remains of siege towers smoldering by the river. She thought of Ned back in Winterfell, juggling the responsibilities of the North. She wondered if they would ever have peace again. War, however, has a ravenous appetite. The Lannisters responded by bringing up more men, more supplies. Word came that Tywin had somehow negotiated a pact with Walder Frey, granting him river crossing in exchange for Frey advantage. Reeling from betrayal, Edmure had no choice but to fortify further. The Tully forces sent urgent pleas to Robb Stark, who was embroiled in battles of his own. Robb's victories against the Lannisters had made him a legend, the young wolf, they called him, but legends alone did not feed or pay armies. The North's resources were finite, its men weary from continuous campaigns. Back in Winterfell, Ned felt the strain of this war deeply, though the fighting was happening hundreds of miles away. He had to manage ravens from east and west, news of House Bolton's discontent, news of raids by Iron Islanders along the stony shore, the day-to-day tasks of governance in a land that rarely saw its lord in peacetime. On top of that, he dreaded the day that some cunning lord or lady discovered the truth about Jon. Each time a raven arrived from the south, Ned's heart clenched, fearing it might contain dire news. He had not confided in Robb about Jon's parentage. Only a handful of living souls knew it, himself, Howland Reed, and likely Lord Varys. Peter Baelish suspected more than he knew. The King Robert, now deceased, had learned it on that fateful day in the Red Keep. If the new powers in the capital ever got hold of that knowledge, would they try to use Jon as a chess piece? Or simply kill him to prevent another Targaryen from rising? Ned saw no reason to share such a burden with Robb, who had enough to worry about. The secret was his alone, a permanent shadow over his life. One crisp morning, a ragged band of men arrived at Winterfell's gates. Former soldiers, farmers displaced by war, all half-starved. They begged for shelter, having walked from the southern riverlands, fleeing the devastation. Ned offered them bread and salt, abiding by the ancient custom of guest right. He listened to their stories of pillaged villages and corpses left to rot in fields. They had no love for Lannisters or Starks. They only yearned for safety. Ned felt the bitter sting of guilt. This was the reality of war, the small folk caught in the crossfire. In the library tower, he later met with Maester Luwin to review accounts of the harvest. They would not have enough to feed so many refugees all winter if more arrived. The conversation cast a pall over Ned's mood. From the vantage of lords and kings, war was politics. From the vantage of peasants, war was hunger, despair, and death. He recalled how Robert's rebellion had begun with righteous fury. Aerys Targaryen had murdered Brandon Stark and Rickard Stark, and Rhaegar had taken Lyanna. Yet even that war left scars across the kingdoms. Now they were at it again, and the justification felt murkier. Yet there was no turning back. Winter was coming, both figuratively and literally. The cold winds blew, the nights lengthened, and still the armies marched. Word reached Ned of a new front in the war. Stannis Baratheon had captured Storm's End after a brief siege, proclaiming himself king of Westeros in earnest. Some lords flocked to his banner. Others, like the Tyrells, stood firmly behind Joffrey, largely because of the betrothal that eventually linked Margaery Tyrell to the Boy King. In the chaos, few paid heed to the notion of a Targaryen line in the north. However, that changed when a certain Red Priestess traveling with Stannis allegedly spoke of Azor Ahai reborn, a prince promised in ancient prophecy. Rumor had it that she used flames to see images and shapes, making cryptic pronouncements. Some said she told Stannis he was the chosen one. Others believed she sought something else, another figure who might claim the mantle of prophecy, a Targaryen boy hidden away. The rumor was ephemeral, swirling about in half-coherent stories told by travelers. But Ned heard enough to wonder if this red sorceress might stumble on Jon's existence. That terrified him more than the Lannisters. Such religious zealots were often unstoppable once they latched onto a prophecy. At Castle Black, Jon Snow remained blissfully unaware of his starring role in any prophecy. His day-to-day concerns revolved around ensuring the gates were secure, training new recruits, and making the occasional ranging beyond the wall. Jeor Mormont trusted him, confided in him. The rest of the Watch, grudgingly or not, began to respect him as well. With Samwell Tarly's help, Jon tried to gather more knowledge of the White Walkers from ancient texts. Most were contradictory and vague, but the danger felt real enough in the cold emptiness of the forest. One bleak afternoon, the Watch's scouting party captured a wildling scout near the Milkwater. Under questioning, the man boasted that Mance Rayder would soon gather every wildling tribe, from the frozen shore to the Vens, and lead them across the wall, escaping some greater terror. Jon stood by as Corran Halfhand interrogated the captive. "You crows are all dead men," the wildling sneered. "You think your walls of ice can keep out what's coming?" He laughed, a high, deranged sound. "We'd rather face you than the others." The others. That night, Jon huddled in the old library, Sam turning pages of a worm-eaten tome. They found references to Long Night, to the ancient war, to mysterious figures of ice. Jon's skin prickled reading such passages by candlelight, imagining those cold eyes in the darkness. The realm below was so busy tearing itself apart. It had no inkling of the danger creeping from the far north. Maybe that was how the world ended, quarreling men ignoring the real threat until it was too late. Amid these grim reflections, a raven arrived from Winterfell. It contained no words from Ned, only instructions from Maester Luwin that Ned was traveling to meet with certain lords near the neck, attempting to forge unity. Jon read the letter, feeling a twinge of disappointment. His father wrote so seldom now. Jon closed his eyes, wishing fleetingly that he could see Ned once more. But he had taken the black. He was no Stark of Winterfell. He was a Snow and a man of the Night's Watch. That was his place, his only calling. Weeks passed, the temperature dropping, the nights stretching longer. The war in the south raged on, but in the north, Ned Stark's efforts to maintain stability saw some success. He managed to broker truces among restless northern bannermen, ensuring they turned their might outward to defend from any southern aggression or ironborn raids. He traveled widely, from the Dreadfort to the Rills to White Harbor, meeting lords and forging pacts. The cost was time and risk. Each journey took him away from Winterfell, but each also secured him precious alliances. During one such trip, Ned halted at the little marshy stronghold of House Reed in the Neck. Greywater Watch was a shifting castle, and few outsiders ever found it. But Ned knew its location courtesy of old ties. Howland Reed greeted him warmly, remembering the day they had stood together at the Tower of Joy. Over a simple meal of fish stew, they spoke in hushed tones. "I have heard the rumor that a Targaryen child grew up in Winterfell's walls," Howland said quietly, his eyes flicking around to ensure no watchers lurked. "Some of my people heard it from men of the south, half drunk around a campfire. It is not widespread, but it lingers. We must be careful." Ned sighed, stirring his stew. "I do all I can to bury it. With Robert gone, some might think it's no longer a threat, but with war everywhere, men will do anything for advantage. If Tywin Lannister or the Freys believed they could strengthen their position by exposing or killing Jon." He let the thought trail off, too grim to finish. Howland nodded, rubbing his chin. "Jon is at the wall. That might be his best protection. Men seldom pay attention to the Watch, and they would not guess a Targaryen heir to wear black. Still, we cannot forget your sister's blood runs in his veins. Rhaegar Targaryen was no common man. If ever Jon learns the truth—" "He won't," Ned said, voice firm. "He cannot. If he did, the realm might tear itself apart further. I promised Lyanna." Howland studied him a moment, sadness flickering over his face. "You have carried this burden too long, my friend. If you ever need my help—" Ned offered a faint smile. "I know. Thank you." He finished the stew in silence, thinking of that day so many years ago when they'd knelt at Lyanna's bedside, each losing something dear. Back in King's Landing, the war had brought its own brand of misery. Famine loomed, the city's population swollen by refugees. Riots broke out, culminating in savage reprisals by the Gold Cloaks. King Joffrey took a twisted pleasure in punishing dissent, his cruelty unchecked by Cersei, who herself was consumed by power games with the Tyrells and by managing her father's demands. The Iron Throne sat precariously on a mound of debts owed to the Iron Bank of Braavos and the Lannisters' own coffers. Into this poisonous environment, Stannis Baratheon led his army after forging a new alliance in the Stormlands. The city braced for a siege. The Red Woman, Melisandre, was rumored to have visions in her flames of a boy, with a dire wolf and a dragon's shadow swirling around him. The rumor was whispered among the servants in the Red Keep. Some said it referred to a new Targaryen, others that it was pure fancy. Cersei demanded to know more, but her attempts to gather intelligence often led nowhere. Varys reported only vagueness. Baelish, for his part, gleaned enough to suspect the rumor might be about Jon Snow. But he kept silent, weighing whether releasing such information would cause more chaos or reap him some advantage. He had grown adept at reading the winds of war, sensing that sooner or later, a Targaryen might become a key piece on this chessboard. Off in the east, Daenerys Targaryen was said to be forging alliances, building an army of freed slaves and raising dragons. That alone could eventually overshadow any claim from an unknown bastard in the north. But there was an undeniable power in having a second Targaryen in one's grasp, if that second Targaryen could be manipulated. And so the pieces on the board moved. Ned Stark continued his precarious dance to keep the North out of further ruin, while also supporting Robb's efforts in the war. Caitlyn pleaded for more troops to break the siege of Riverrun, while Robb clashed with Lannister forces near the Whispering Wood and beyond. Stannis closed in on King's Landing, and in the far, far north, Jon Snow found himself standing against threats that dwarfed any southern ambition. One night, as a storm raged over the wall, Jon patrolled the top with Ed Tollett and a new recruit from the shadow of the Skirling Pass. Lightning forked the sky, illuminating the wilderness. Thunder boomed, rattling the ice beneath their feet. Jon's cloak whipped around him, the wind biting through his layers of black. He gazed out across the darkness, trying to pierce the gloom. Something felt wrong out there, like a chill deeper than any winter cold. Ghost's hackles rose, and he let out a low growl. "Easy, Ghost," Jon murmured, kneeling to run a hand over the direwolf's back. The hair stood on end. Tollett shifted uneasily. "I prefer quiet storms that pass on their way. This one sounds angry." In a blinding flash of lightning, Jon glimpsed movement far below, a shape flitting across the snow. Then darkness again. "What was that?" the new recruit asked, his voice trembling. Jon shook his head. "I can't be certain. Might be a shadow, might be a person." Another flash and the shape was gone. Anxiety gnawed at him. He signaled for the others to remain vigilant while he sent a runner down the steps to report to the officer on duty. If there were wildlings out in the storm, why were they so close? Had they come to test the wall's defenses? Or was it something else entirely? At dawn, a small search party ventured out. They found tracks partially filled with snow, human footprints, but oddly spaced, as though the walker had moved unnaturally. They followed the trail until it vanished near a copse of dead trees. No sign of where the person had gone or how. A sense of dread settled over the rangers. Jon tried to keep calm, but the memory of the vanished shape lingered. That night, he had nightmares of glowing blue eyes and the echo of ghostly shrieks. Days later, word reached Castle Black that a contingent of men from Eastwatch by the Sea had encountered whites, reanimated corpses that attacked them at night. The news spread through the watch like wildfire, leaving men pale and fearful. Jon recalled the time they had brought 2 corpses inside the castle, men who rose again in the dark. He shuddered, remembering the cold malevolence in their eyes. The White Walkers were real. No matter how men tried to deny it, the truth was clawing its way south. If Mance Rayder's wildling army advanced, it was likely they fled the others, seeking refuge. But the kingdoms below were too busy with their petty wars to comprehend the magnitude of what was coming. Despite the realm's preoccupations, news of Stannis Baratheon's siege of King's Landing made its way north. Stannis's fleet hammered at the capital's defenses, though the Lannisters sprang a cunning trap on the Blackwater, unleashing wildfire that consumed many of Stannis's ships. Ultimately, Stannis retreated, and the Lannisters triumphed with reinforcements led by House Tyrell. King Joffrey's victory celebrations were lavish, but the city starved all the same. The war was far from over, though the Lannisters secured a tenuous hold on the throne. In the aftermath, the rumor of the red comet in the sky, the talk of Azor Ahai, and the Targaryen girl across the sea with living dragons continued to swirl. Whispers drifted from the capital that the Red Woman had returned to Dragonstone with Stannis, muttering about a black-blooded dragon in the north, something about salt and smoke. All intangible, improbable. Yet when ravens carried these scraps of rumor to Ned Stark in Winterfell, he felt a chill that rivaled the coldest wind. He confided in Maester Luwin privately, pacing the solar. "She might be speaking of Jon, though I cannot fathom how. She does not know his name or his face, surely." Maester Luwin tilted his head. "Prophecies are strange, my lord. Often they are misread or lead nowhere. But it would be wise to remain vigilant." Ned nodded, exhaling a shaky breath. "I shall. We can only hope that with the war raging, no one has the time or the clarity to connect any dots." Luwin softly offered, "Your burden is heavy, my lord. Remember, you have allies who can help you bear it, should you choose. But Ned would not share the truth, not fully. It was too dangerous. He thanked the maester for his counsel and set about reinforcing Winterfell's security. If the realm continued to tear itself apart, if one side or another decided to press north, he must be ready to protect his people and, by extension, Jon's secret. As the lunar cycle turned again, a fresh wind swept in from the shivering sea, bringing thick snow. Winter was descending in earnest now, each day colder than the last. In the God's Wood at Winterfell, the ancient weirwood stood silent, its face carved into a solemn expression. Ned knelt before it often, seeking guidance in the old gods. Sometimes he thought he felt a presence, something stirring in the bark and leaves, but no clear answers came. One evening, after a day spent dealing with disputes among lesser lords, he returned to his solar to find a sealed letter waiting on his desk. The seal was black wax, stamped with a small swirl, no house sigil he recognized. Intrigued and wary, he broke it open. The letter was written in a disguised hand. Lord Stark, rumors speak of a Targaryen boy in the north. Others say it is but a ghost story. If the realm were to learn of such a boy, it could shift the entire tide of war. Use caution, for enemies do not sleep. I can help if we align our interests. Burn this letter when you finish. No signature. No clue to the sender's identity. Ned's heart pounded. Had Varys written this? Baelish? Someone else entirely, seeking to blackmail him? The note's final line threatened more than it offered. He read it twice, then threw it in the fireplace. The flames devoured the parchment, turning it to ash in moments. But the menace lingered. He sat alone, the flickering light dancing on his face, feeling the weight of the secret intensify. He decided to send a discreet raven to Howland Reed, asking him to keep watch for suspicious travelers in the neck. He also wrote to the Manderleys, urging them to be vigilant about any who might pry into Stark affairs. Whether this was a real threat or a phantom, he could not say, but it was best to prepare. Far across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen stood in the red wastes of Essos, 3 small dragons coiled around her. She was forging an army from freed slaves, forging alliances with sellsword companies, intent on reclaiming the Iron Throne she believed was hers by right. Stories reached Westeros in dribs and drabs, each more outlandish than the last. Some claimed she was the mother of dragons, that she walked unburnt through fire. Others said she was no more than a pretender with lizards. For many in Westeros, she was little more than a fable. But Ned Stark knew enough to fear the name Targaryen, not because he believed Daenerys was evil, but because that name might plunge the realm deeper into bloodshed. As the year ground on, the War of the Five Kings entered another brutal phase. Robb Stark scored victories in the Westerlands, but it was not enough to break the Lannisters. Renly Baratheon was dead, and Stannis licked his wounds on Dragonstone, apparently dabbling in dark magic. The Tyrells threw their full weight behind Joffrey, uniting powerful armies. Rivalries flared across the realm, and the small folk suffered. Ned heard rumors that King's Landing was near famine, that the crowds jeered the royal family, that Joffrey had begun punishing people by the dozens, heads lining the city walls. Through it all, the rumor about a Targaryen boy in the north persisted like an ember that refused to die. Some lords whispered of it as an idle curiosity, others saw it as nonsense. A few cunning minds suspected that Ned Stark might have hidden something crucial, but the complexities of war meant none devoted their full energy to chasing that rumor. Not yet. The turning point came unexpectedly, through the last person Ned would have expected, Roose Bolton. The Lord of the Dreadfort was known for his eerie calm and calculating nature, a man rumored to flay enemies alive, as was the old custom of his house. He had aligned with the Starks for the time being, but his loyalty was ambiguous. When Ned convened a gathering of northern lords to discuss strategy for the coming months, hoping to finalize troop movements to aid Robb, Bolton lingered after the meeting ended, requesting a private word. They stood in the solar, a fire crackling in the hearth. Bolton's pale eyes flickered with an unsettling light. "Lord Stark," he said evenly, "there is a matter that I believe weighs on you, though perhaps more heavily than it need. Ned folded his arms. "Speak plainly, Lord Bolton." Bolton did not smile. "Very well. Certain lords in the south whisper that House Stark shelters a Targaryen. They believe it might be your bastard." His voice was as cold as ice. "I have found no direct proof, but whispers like these, if they catch flame, could be dangerous. The Lannisters will not let such talk lie if they hear it. And what if Stannis or the Tyrells find it useful to turn the realm against the north?" Ned's jaw tightened. He forced himself to keep his voice level. "That rumor is baseless. The boy at the wall is my son, of Stark blood. I fathered him during the rebellion, and that is the end of it." Bolton inclined his head slightly. "I see. Then let us hope that those with power believe your story. I simply wish to inform you that the rumor grows more persistent. We must be prepared. Should any army march north in search of a Targaryen, we must face them together, must we not?" Something about Bolton's tone set Ned's knee. Bolton gave a slight bow. "I am pleased to hear it, my lord. You can count on House Bolton's unwavering support." With that, he departed, footsteps echoing ominously in the corridor. Ned stared after him, unable to shake the sensation that Bolton was fishing for leverage. Ned remained in the solar for a long time, gazing into the flames. If the rumor persisted enough to reach Bolton's ears plainly, it was indeed creeping closer to the surface. He thought of writing to Jon, warning him that trouble might arise, but what could he say that wouldn't arouse suspicion? He could hardly put the secret on parchment, and telling Jon the truth now would do more harm than good. The boy would be torn apart, forced to question everything he believed. Ned recalled Robert's vow. If the realm ever discovered the boy was Targaryen, Robert would have put him to the sword. Now Robert was gone, but others might prove just as ruthless. He took a steadying breath. Jon, for his part, had to remain in ignorance. Weeks passed as the snow piled higher, and the nights grew ever longer. White Harbor's harbor froze at the edges, restricting trade. Supplies became precious. Travelers from the south risked storms to carry messages. One day, a battered man-at-arms from the Blackfish, Ser Brynden Tully, arrived with news for Caitlyn. Riverrun was on the brink of collapse, the siege having dragged on too long. Edmure Tully was ill, hostages had been taken. They needed immediate relief or they might be forced to yield. That message left Caitlyn pale and trembling with anger. Ned promised to do all in his power to send men. But how? The north was locked in ice, short on provisions, and every path south was fraught with Lannister or Frey patrols. But the alternative was to abandon Riverrun. That was unthinkable. Ned called another war council. Lord Wyman Manderley suggested a coordinated push with Robb's host. If Robb struck the Lannisters from the west while the north advanced from the north, the Riverrun siege might be broken. It was a bold plan, reliant on exact timing. Ned hesitated, glancing at Caitlyn's haunted face. In the end, he agreed to attempt it. Ravens flew in all directions, messages sealed with the direwolf sigil. At the same time, ominous tidings came from the east. Daenerys Targaryen was rumored to have sacked a city called Astapor and freed an army of slave soldiers. The rumor claimed she was forging alliances with other city-states, building a fleet. If she crossed the sea with dragons and an army, the Seven Kingdoms would face a threat unlike any since Aegon's conquest. If that happened, the significance of a hidden Targaryen boy might change drastically. Some might rally to her, others might scramble to kill any potential rival. Ned realized with a pang that if Daenerys truly came west, and if by some chance she learned of Jon, he pushed the thought away. Too many ifs. He had enough battles to worry about. The War Council concluded, and Ned returned to his solar, weighed down by the decisions made. He remembered the day he parted from Robert, the unspoken tension. Maybe if they had managed to reconcile more fully, the realm would not be so fractured. But the past could not be undone. Ned carried guilt like a hidden wound, always on the verge of bleeding anew. He had little time to dwell, for the next morning, a party of Karstark riders arrived, bringing fresh support for the planned march south. The courtyard filled with the stomping of hooves and the ring of steel as the men dismounted. Caitlyn greeted them in Ned's stead, offering them the hall's warmth. That night, the lords feasted together, forging renewed bonds. The talk around the tables was of war, always war, and the future. Lord Karstark's eldest son spoke in low tones about the possibility of the Lannisters seeking peace if Tywin's position weakened. But none truly believed in an easy resolution. Ned ate little, slipping away early. He climbed the battlements, gazing out at the white landscape. From here, the kingdom looked serene, cloaked in snow, touched by pale moonlight. A hush fell across the world, broken only by the distant barking of dogs. Peaceful, almost, and yet Ned knew that beyond those snowy fields lay an inferno of conflict. If they marched south, more men would die, good men, fathers, and sons. He closed his eyes, inhaling the frigid air, feeling the cold sting his lungs. A question gnawed at him. Was there no path to end this war without further bloodshed? The realms of men might never unite unless faced by a terror beyond their understanding. If the others truly marched south, perhaps that terror would unify them, yet at a cost too horrifying to imagine. His thoughts turned inevitably to Jon. Would the boy see war come to the wall? Or would he remain safely unknown, a Targaryen who would never claim that name? Jon's life had been shaped from birth by secrets and lies. The tragedy was that he might die never knowing the truth of his heritage. Yet Ned could not decide which was more tragic, that Jon might never know, or that he might discover it and be destroyed by the knowledge. While Ned wrestled with such matters, events beyond his control were brewing in the south. Peter Baelish, ever the opportunist, had been negotiating a new alliance with the Tyrells, weaving a tapestry of half-truths and subtle threats. In the course of his maneuverings, he found himself cornered by Lady Olenna Tyrell, the famed Queen of Thorns, who teased out hints of the Targaryen rumor. Baelish admitted that some believed a child of Rhaegar Targaryen survived in the north. Olenna listened intently, a curious glint in her eye. She made no admissions, but her mind clearly raced with the possibilities. If Margaery was to marry King Joffrey, House Tyrell had a vested interest in ensuring no other claimant, or rumored claimant, interfered. Word also reached Tywin Lannister that some northern lords uttered the name Targaryen in hushed circles. Tywin, a pragmatic man, did not dismiss it out of hand. He questioned his intelligence network, demanded to know if Eddard Stark harbored the child. His agents produced uncertain reports, concluding that Ned had a bastard named Jon Snow at the Wall. Many lords had long heard that tale, though the mother's identity remained unknown. Tywin weighed that information coldly, suspecting that if the boy were Rhaegar's spawn, Ned would never be foolish enough to keep him so public. And yet the Wall was remote where no one cared to look. Tywin decided it was likely rumor and nothing more. Still, as a man who trusted neither rumor nor coincidence, he ordered his spymaster to keep an ear to the ground. And so the stage was set, tension mounting on every front. All it would take was one slip, one piece of tangible proof, and the hounds would scent the Targaryen blood. That slip came in a small, unexpected way. A letter from Lord Commander Mormont reached Winterfell, describing sightings of a man with pale blue eyes near the haunted forest. It was addressed to Ned, because Mormont knew Ned might best influence the lords of the north for aid. Within the letter, Mormont also praised Jon Snow's efforts, mentioning that the boy had the blood of a king in his veins, a turn of phrase intended to speak of his leadership qualities. Mormont's poetic flourish. That line was innocuous enough, but the letter changed hands one too many times before reaching Ned. It passed through a courier who had no direct loyalty to House Stark, a sellsword who read it out of curiosity. Curious about that blood of a king remark, the courier copied the letter's contents onto a small scrap and sold it to a merchant in White Harbor known to traffic in rumors. From White Harbor, the merchant carried the scrap south, where he sold it again to a Lyseni trader, who then brought it to King's Landing, offering it among a trove of rumored intelligence to a minor functionary in the Red Keep. That functionary, in turn, was in the pay of Varys. Soon enough, the spider had in his possession a fragment of Mormont's letter that read, "Snow is a good lad, with the blood of a king in his veins." Varys, ever cautious, knew Mormont's likely meaning was figurative. But in the swirling climate of rumors, any mention of blood of a king referencing Ned Stark's bastard might stoke the dormant embers. Varys weighed the consequences. If he quashed the rumor, it might remain inert. If it served his aims, he could feed it to the right ears. He also knew that Daenerys Targaryen was growing stronger. A living Targaryen in Westeros might be a convenient rallying point or a dangerous competitor. The realm was at a crossroads. Varys prided himself on serving the good of the realm, which often meant playing all sides at once. He decided, for the moment, to keep the letter to himself. But secrets have a way of slipping free. In the labyrinth of the Red Keep, Qyburn, an ex-maester with dark proclivities, happened to glean knowledge of the scrap. Perhaps he overheard a conversation between two of Varys's little birds. Perhaps he glimpsed the fragment on a desk when Varys was distracted. Regardless, Qyburn latched onto the phrase. He had the ear of certain Lannister men and might find a use for it. A living Targaryen in the north would make a potent threat or bargaining chip. If the Lannisters destroyed such a figure, it would eliminate a claim that might rival theirs. Thus, the fragile equilibrium balanced on a knife's edge. One more step, and the rumor would come roaring into the open. In Winterfell, Ned received Mormont's letter weeks later, the original unaltered version. He read the passage about Jon's leadership skills and the mention of the blood of a king with a wry smile. Mormont had no idea how dangerous those words were. Ned wrote back, thanking him for the update, carefully avoiding any reference to that particular phrase. He tried to reassure Mormont that he would rally more men to the Watch's cause, though the war left the North with scarce resources. Still, night after night, the letter's phrase echoed in Ned's mind. If it fell into the wrong hands, chaos would erupt. And the wrong hands were everywhere these days. As if the gods themselves sought to prove him right, a raven arrived from White Harbor, carrying ominous news. A group of Sellswords had been spotted poking about, asking after Ned's bastard. They were persistent, offering coin for details. Ned felt the pit in his stomach grow. He wasted no time ordering men to investigate and, if necessary, detain those Sellswords. With war raging, a few more disappearances might go unnoticed, but Ned loathed the thought. He was no tyrant, nor did he wish to kill men merely for chasing rumors. Yet how many swords would he have to silence to protect Jon? He confided in Caitlyn. She listened, her face stricken with worry. We are beset on all sides, Ned. The war with the Lannisters, the threat of the Greyjoys, the famine. Now this. If the rumor spreads. Ned stared at the floor, voice subdued. We must do everything in our power to stop it. She took his hand gently. You've sacrificed so much for this secret. Would that the realm were kinder. Jon is a good boy. I know he is. But he stands in the path of 1,000 swords if this truth emerges. Ned gave a curt nod. I will not let them harm him. One way or another, we must quell this. And so the net closed around the rumor-mongers. Ned's men apprehended the Sellswords. After some questioning, none too gentle, they learned the men had been hired through intermediaries, likely funded by a merchant from King's Landing. Possibly that merchant was in turn a catspaw for someone else. The men knew little, other than that their employer wanted dirt on Eddard Stark's bastard. Ned ordered them released with a warning. He might have imprisoned or executed them for good measure, but he hoped to avoid further blood on his hands. Whether that mercy would cost him later, he could not say. A lull settled on the north as winter deepened. Snowdrifts rose, roads vanished beneath white blankets. Most travel slowed to a crawl. The men preparing to march south had to contend with near-impassable conditions. Ned suspected that any invasion from the south would also be stalled, unless the Lannisters attempted a daring winter campaign. In a twisted sense, the harsh cold defended the north as much as any army. Caitlyn chose to remain in Winterfell through the coldest moons, holding out hope that Robb would prevail against the Lannisters, eventually lifting the siege on Riverrun. Edmure still held out, by the last account, though his condition worsened. Each day, she read the letters from the Tully bannermen, pacing anxiously by the hearth. At last, near the turn of the year, Ned received word that Robb Stark had achieved a stunning victory near the crag, forcing a retreat of Lannister forces. That meant Tywin would have to shift troops west, perhaps easing the pressure on Riverrun. Hope fluttered briefly in Caitlyn's chest, though it was tempered by the war's unpredictability. She and Ned found themselves clinging to each other more in these fraught times. In those same weeks, the nights were so long that day felt like a brief candle. The small folk in Winterfell prayed for spring, though the chill told Ned that true spring would not come for a good while yet. One morning, he walked the battlements and noticed a group of ravens circling overhead. They seemed agitated. A stable boy told him ravens sometimes grew restless when big storms approached. Another storm? Winterfell could ill afford more snow, but weather cared nothing for mortal concerns. He returned to his solar to find 3 letters waiting. One carried the seal of the Night's Watch, another from Robb's host, and the last from an unknown wax stamp. He tensed, recalling the ominous black seal from weeks before. He opened the Night's Watch letter first. Inside, Lord Commander Mormont's voice rang clear. The situation beyond the wall was dire. Wildlings massed in unprecedented numbers, and the White Walkers were no longer old wives' tales. Mormont implored Ned to send what help he could. The realm was in peril. Setting that aside, Ned opened Robb's letter. It detailed the Lannister retreat from the crag, the capture of a handful of important prisoners, and requests for more supplies. Robb's tone was confident but weary, a young man pressed to the edge of his endurance. He signed it as Robb Stark, King in the North. Ned's heart panged at those words. He had never wanted his son to bear such a weight, but that was the shape of the times. Finally, he braced himself and opened the 3rd letter. The parchment was plain, the handwriting uneven, but the message was succinct. The rumor grows. Before long, it will reach powerful ears. If you value your bastard's life, you may wish to speak with me in person. I reside where the Titan stands tall. Make haste or watch him burn. The Titan stood tall in Braavos, the great statue that guarded the harbor. Someone was summoning Ned across the narrow sea. The threat was explicit. Watch him burn. They meant Jon. Ned's knuckles tightened around the parchment. Could it be an empty threat or a lure? Braavos was far and the journey dangerous in wartime, but ignoring it could be worse. If the sender truly had evidence of Jon's parentage, they might spread it freely if Ned refused to comply. He sank into a chair, mind whirling. With the war raging, leaving the North was madness. Yet if he did nothing and this conspirator revealed Jon's secret, the consequences would be dire. He could send an agent, perhaps, but would that suffice? The letter's tone suggested they wanted him specifically. Night fell as he agonized over the decision. Caitlyn found him sitting in darkness, the parchment in his hands. She lit a candle, saw his expression. "What is it?" she asked. He told her, voice low and grim. She looked aghast. "You can't simply sail to Braavos alone in the midst of all this. What if it's a trap?" He dragged a hand through his hair. "It could be, but if it's real, someone might hold proof of Jon's lineage. Rhaegar's ring, or a piece of Lyanna's old letters, or witness testimony. If that surfaces publicly, I lose all hope of keeping him safe." Caitlyn swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the window. The wind howled outside, carrying flurries of snow. "Ned, the seas are treacherous this time of year, and the war has made sailing more perilous still. What of your duties here? The men must march soon to aid Riverrun. Robb needs you." Ned bowed his head. "I know, but Jon needs me as well. Or do we forsake him?" Silence stretched between them, thick with the tension of love and fear. Finally, Caitlyn spoke, her voice trembling. "He is not mine, but he is yours, Ned, and you have always been a good man. I cannot tell you to abandon him or to risk your life for him. Whichever path you choose, it will weigh on us all." He looked at her face, etched with lines of worry. "I made Lyanna a promise. I cannot stand idle if there's a chance to protect Jon." Caitlyn closed her eyes, then nodded slowly. "Then we must arrange it carefully. Send envoys to your bannermen. Delegate the southern march to Lord Wyman or the Karstarks. You cannot simply vanish. And take a guard with you, a small retinue." He squeezed her hand. "I will. I only pray it's not a trap." So it was decided. Over the next few days, Ned made frantic preparations. He delegated tasks for the upcoming campaign to the Karstarks and Manderleys, ensuring they would coordinate with Robb. He told them he was traveling east on urgent business related to potential trade deals or, if pressed, to the Iron Bank of Braavos. It was not entirely a lie. Braavos was known for its bank. He confided only in Maester Luwin and Caitlyn the true reason. The morning Ned departed was gray and dismal, snow swirling across the courtyard. Caitlyn embraced him tightly. He wore a thick fur cloak, a sword at his belt, and a small pouch of letters giving him safe passage from White Harbor. With him were a handful of loyal men, including Jory Castle's cousin Mathar and a few stout northerners skilled at arms and stealth. They mounted their horses, riding out of Winterfell's gates under the watchful eyes of the guards. Ned looked back at the ancient walls. He saw Caitlyn on the ramparts, slender figure wrapped in a cloak, her hair whipped by the wind. His heart squeezed in his chest, uncertain when or if he would see her again. Then he spurred his horse, leading his small band onto the King's Road heading southeast. They would aim for White Harbor, from which they would book passage by ship to Braavos. The journey was arduous. Snow clogged the roads, and the cold was bone-deep. At night, they huddled around meager fires, men's breath pluming in the frosty air. Wolves howled in the distance. Sometimes they camped at small holdfasts whose occupants were half-starved from the war's disruptions. Ned gave them what food he could spare, but it was never enough. The deeper they traveled, the more Ned saw how the realm suffered. This was the real cost of kings clashing, of hidden secrets fueling distrust. After more than a fortnight, they finally reached White Harbor. The port city lay quiet under a blanket of snow, the towering walls overlooking the partly frozen harbor. Ned made arrangements with Lord Wyman Manderley, who greeted him with courtesy but obvious curiosity. Ned offered only that he had urgent business across the narrow sea. Manderley, to his credit, did not pry, though he pressed Ned to promise he would return swiftly if the realm's fortunes changed. Ned nodded, voice grim. They found a Braavosi trader in port, the Sea Raven, whose captain was willing to brave the winter seas for a hefty fee. Ned paid from the Stark coffers, ensuring the sum was enough to guarantee a measure of discretion. Within days, the Sea Raven set sail, cutting through the frigid waters as a biting wind howled. Ned stood on the deck, cloak flapping, gazing back at the receding shoreline. He thought of Winterfell, of Caitlyn, of Robb in the field, and of Jon on the wall. Everything he loved lay behind him, yet he ventured forward for the sake of a vow. The crossing was punishing. Storms rocked the ship, waves crashing over the deck. More than once Ned feared they would sink, but the Braavosi captain navigated with skill. The men grew sallow and seasick. Ice formed on rigging and railings. Days blurred into nights, tension thick among the crew. But at last, the Titan of Braavos appeared on the horizon, a massive statue straddling the harbor mouth, raising a horn and sword in silent greeting. Braavos sprawled behind it, a city of canals and swirling fog. Ned stared up at the Titan as they passed beneath, its sheer immensity dwarfing the Sea Raven. The letter's words echoed in his mind. I reside where the Titan stands tall. Make haste or watch him burn. He wondered who waited for him in this city of secrets. Once docked, Ned and his men disembarked carefully. Braavos was a tangle of winding canals, narrow streets, and masked courtesans. The air smelled of salt and fish. The captain warned Ned to mind pickpockets and cutthroats. Ned led his men along the docks, where hawkers sold eels, briny fish, and spiced wines. Overhead, gulls circled, cawing raucously. He clutched the letter in his cloak pocket, scanning the crowds for any sign of a contact. They secured modest lodgings at an inn near the Purple Harbor. At twilight, a messenger arrived, a small boy with shaved head, wearing plain clothes. He handed Ned a slip of parchment, then darted off before Ned could question him. The slip read only, "Tomorrow at the Moon Pool, by the statue of the Sea Lord. Come alone." Ned glanced at his men, unsettled by the secrecy. But he had no choice. The next day, he left them behind at the inn, taking only his sword and a dagger. Braavos was a labyrinth. Gondolas glided along the canals, oarsmen calling for passengers. The city's architecture was unlike anything in Westeros. Tall towers, colored glass, and statues perched on arches. Ned found the moon pool in the heart of the city, a circular basin fed by a canal. An imposing statue of a past sea lord stood on a pedestal at its edge, gazing outward with stern dignity. Ned waited there, scanning the passers-by. It was midday. The sun filtered through a haze, turning the city a muted gold. After several tense minutes, a figure approached in a dark hooded cloak, face concealed. Ned tensed, hand drifting near his hilt. The figure paused a few paces away. Then, in a low voice, "Lord Stark, you are as honorable as they say to come all this way." He tried to peer under the hood. "Who are you?" A slight laugh. "A friend, potentially." The figure moved closer, revealing a woman's face, sharp-featured, hair cut short. Her accent was Braavosi, though she spoke the common tongue fluidly. "I work for one who has interests in Westeros. My master discovered certain documents pointing to the parentage of your bastard. Letters from the Tower of Joy, signed by your sister, mentioning Rhaegar Targaryen by name." Ned's heart lurched. "That's impossible." She gave a small shrug. "So you say, perhaps the letters are forgeries, or perhaps they are not. My master does not concern himself with verifying them. He simply knows that men in King's Landing would pay dearly for such proof. But he is a cautious man. He thought to approach you first. If you value the boy, you may strike a bargain." Ned stared at her, anger and desperation mixing in his chest. "What is your price?" Her eyes flicked around, ensuring no one was close enough to overhear. "My master wants the dissolution of certain debts the Iron Bank claims House Stark owes. Small sums, trifling in the grand scheme, but irritants to him. He also wants a promise that, should you ever hold power in the South or influence over the Iron Throne, you will see him repaid in kind. There is more. He wants your assurance that if war with the Targaryen girl in the East comes, Braavos will have favorable trade agreements with the North. In return, he will give you the letters and vow never to speak of them to another soul." Ned's lip curled. "This is blackmail." She smiled thinly. "It is business. The documents exist. If you refuse, they may find their way to King's Landing or Stannis Baratheon, or who knows. War profits some, but my master prefers stable trade routes. A small concession from you and the risk disappears. Surely that is worth the price." Ned's mind raced. If these documents were real, they might indeed prove Jon's parentage beyond doubt. The realm was a tinderbox. One spark of truth might set it ablaze. He clenched his jaw. "I have no illusions about wearing the Iron Crown. The war is fierce, and I have no desire to be king. As for influence, it is uncertain. But I can promise to facilitate trade with Braavos if the North stands victorious." Her gaze measured him. "We will need more concrete assurances, Lord Stark. My master is aware you are not the only power in the North. There's your son, the king in the North. There's House Bolton, House Manderley, many others. Without your family's backing, any agreement is worthless." He inhaled sharply, the taste of salt on his tongue. "I can speak for my house in matters of trade. That's all I can promise. If these letters truly exist, I must see them." She shook her head. "You will see them after the bargain is struck. These are my master's terms. He is not a fool." Frustration gnawed at him. "I cannot sign away the North on a rumor. What if the letters are forgeries? Then consider this a minor cost for peace of mind," she said, voice cool. "You have more to lose than we do. If you doubt the letters, perhaps you are willing to gamble your bastard's life on that doubt." Ned's fists clenched. The knowledge that Jon's secret rested on this woman's whim was infuriating. Yet he saw no way around it. If the letters had even a chance of being real, he could not afford to walk away. "Very well," he said through gritted teeth. "Draft your terms. I will do what I must." She gave a satisfied nod. "Wise. My master will be pleased. Meet me here again in 2 days' time. Bring wax and seal. We shall draw up an agreement." Before Ned could respond, she turned, melting into the crowd. He stood there, heart pounding, uncertain whether he just saved Jon or doomed the North to new entanglements. 2 days. In that time, he would weigh his options, but he doubted any alternative existed. The idea of forging a pact with some Braavosi manipulator made his skin crawl. Yet if this was the only way to keep Jon safe, so be it. He returned to the inn, a storm of thoughts swirling. His men noticed his grim expression, but he offered no explanations. That night, he stared at the city lights reflecting on the canal waters, thinking of Caitlyn and the vow he made to Lyanna. The memory of her final plea rang in his ears, as though she stood beside him. "Promise me, Ned." "I did," he thought, gazing at his reflection in the dark water. "And it has led me here to this foreign city, dealing with blackmailers. What would you think of me now, Lyanna?" On the appointed day, Ned went back to the moon pool, accompanied by one of his guards who stayed hidden at a distance in case things went awry. The Braavosi woman appeared again, dressed in a different cloak but with the same calculating eyes. She produced a slender parchment, penned in the Braavosi style. Ned read it carefully. The terms were vague in some areas, referring to favors of trade and debts forgiven, but essentially demanded that House Stark guarantee certain privileges to Braavosi merchants for a period of years, as well as a symbolic repayment to the Iron Bank by a certain date. In return, the woman's master promised to deliver all letters referencing Jon's parentage, along with any copies or references, and swear never to disclose them. There was a clause that if Ned reneged on the deal, the blackmailer would consider the agreement void and do as he pleased. Ned's hand shook slightly as he signed. The woman handed him a second parchment, which she claimed was the only existing set of letters from Lyanna. Ned unrolled it with tense fingers, scanning the lines. It was indeed Lyanna's script, or a damn good forgery, referencing her secret union with Rhaegar. The language did not explicitly name the child, but it left little doubt that if he were born, he would be half Targaryen. One line in particular chilled Ned. "Rhaegar told me our son would be the song of ice and fire. I know not what he means, but I feel the truth in my heart." Tears blurred Ned's vision. This was indeed how Lyanna wrote, her style of words, the softness and ardor that he remembered. He traced the lines in silence. Could it be an elaborate forgery? Possibly, but the reference to small, intimate details convinced him it was real. If widely circulated, the letter would have been enough to convict Jon as a Targaryen. Ned's heart pounded at the enormity of it. He swallowed thickly, folding the parchment. "And the rest?" She handed him a small leather pouch. "Fragments, drafts, nothing as damning as that page, but they paint the same picture. My master found them among old ledgers acquired from a Targaryen loyalist's estate. They were nearly lost to mold." He recognized their worth. Ned checked inside. Water-stained scraps, partial sentences in Lyanna's handwriting, references to Rhaegar, the Tower of Joy. He recognized some phrases from memory. It was horrifying to see them here, a tangible threat to Jon's life. He looked up at her, voice rough. "You swear there are no more copies?" She lifted a brow. "None that my master or I know of, but sometimes knowledge seeps out in unexpected ways. We have done our part." Ned exhaled. "Then this business is done." She inclined her head, tucking the signed agreement into her cloak. "Farewell, Lord Stark. May the narrow sea treat you kindly on your return. If you survive this war, perhaps we shall meet again to renegotiate trade expansions." She turned and slipped away into the throng. Ned clutched the letters to his chest, relief warring with lingering dread. It was a victory of sorts. He had removed a serious threat to Jon. But the uneasy feeling remained that the rumor was bigger than any single set of letters. Others might still discover the truth, or new evidence could surface. Even so, this was one less sword hanging over Jon's head. He wasted no time. Gathering his men, he booked passage back on the Sea Raven, anxious to leave Braavos before more intrigues ensnared him. As the ship pulled away from the harbor, Ned looked up at the Titan, remembering how close Jon had come to ruin. He could almost imagine the Titan's stone eyes watching him depart. The return voyage was no less grueling, battered by winter storms. One of Ned's guards nearly died from fever. Yet the ship pressed on, eventually sighting the coastline near White Harbor again. They disembarked, weary and half-frozen, but alive. Lord Manderley welcomed Ned with polite courtesy, trying to glean the purpose of his eastern journey. Ned deflected with vague references to the Iron Bank. Manderley seemed satisfied enough. Riding north along the snow-laden roads, Ned felt an odd mix of triumph and sorrow. He had gained precious documents that might confirm Jon's birth, but at a dire cost. Pledges to an unknown Braavosi master. The North was now locked into an agreement that might weigh heavily on Robb's future. But Ned had done what he must to safeguard the vow he made to Lyanna. The price of honor was steep. At Winterfell, he arrived late one night to find Caitlyn pacing anxiously in the courtyard. She flew to him the moment he dismounted, relief flooding her face. He held her close, mindful of the men looking on. The rest of the night was spent in whispered conversation by the fire, Ned recounting all that had transpired. She listened, pale and shaken, but did not chastise him. When he showed her the letter from Lyanna, she grew silent, tears glimmering in her eyes. She had never been fond of Jon's existence, but even she recognized the deep sorrow in that letter, the echo of a sister's plea. They burned the scraps in the fireplace. Ned watched the flames consume Lyanna's words, the last link tying Jon to Rhaegar Targaryen, or so he hoped. The ashes curled, blackened, and crumbled, drifting up the chimney and into the night sky, symbolic, perhaps, of how fragile secrets were, how easily a single cinder might land on the thatch of the realm and set it ablaze. Days turned into weeks. Ned resumed his duties, forging ahead with the plan to send reinforcements south. The realm was still drowning in war. Robb fought on, cunning and brave, but the Lannisters were no easy foe. The Tyrell alliance gave King's Landing an advantage in manpower and supplies. Stannis brooded on Dragonstone, and rumors from the east claimed that Daenerys Targaryen, mother of dragons, was at the head of a formidable army. Yet the immediate threat to Jon's safety receded into shadow. Ned prayed that events in the south would keep men's minds occupied, that the Braavosi blackmailer would hold to the deal. Still, each time a raven arrived, his heart pounded until he read the contents, half expecting to find a new threat. None came. Winter pressed down harder. Storms pummeled the north. Food grew scarce. The War of the Five Kings slowed to a crawl, armies hunkering down or moving slowly through the snow-choked roads. In King's Landing, Joffrey chafed at the cold, though the capital rarely saw snow. Tywin consolidated power, ensuring that if any rival tried to march on the city, they would face the combined might of the Crown and Highgarden. Peter Baelish, apparently ennobled further by the Crown, flitted between plots, always seeking advantage. He heard fleeting references to a Braavosi arrangement but could not confirm details. The Targaryen rumor about Ned's bastard dulled to a faint murmur. Far to the north at Castle Black, Jon Snow stood watch on the ice once more, the frigid wind cutting through him. He did not know of his near brush with destruction, nor of Ned's journey across the sea in his name. He merely stood, vigilant, scanning the white horizon for signs of wildlings or worse. Ghost crouched at his side, silent and watchful. The sun was setting, a swirl of red and orange across the western sky. In that dying light, Jon glimpsed flickers of movement along the treeline far below, where the forest stretched endlessly. His breath caught. Sometimes, in that half-light, illusions danced on the eye. But Ghost's low growl told him that not all illusions were false. He and his brothers in black had a far different war to fight, one that would not hinge on claims of birthright or crowns, but on the primal contest of the living against the dead. It might be that the secret of his parentage never reached him until that greater battle was decided, if it was ever decided at all. For winter was here, and the long night threatened, and the carefully guarded secret that King Robert Baratheon had once uncovered remained a faint spark in a world on the brink of darkness. Yet sparks can ignite the largest fires, and even the darkest night can yield to a single flicker of dawn. So the realm waited, in war and winter, for the hour when truths long buried might break through the snow, like the first green shoot heralding spring, or a final doom. Only time would tell whether Jon Snow, child of ice and fire, would remain forever in the shadows, or rise to claim a destiny that could reshape the Seven Kingdoms as profoundly as Aegon's conquest. And if that day came, many a lord and king would remember the day Robert Baratheon first learned of the Targaryen blood coursing through the veins of Ned Stark's so-called bastard, and how the realm's fate turned upon one man's vow, one woman's dying wish, and a secret that refused to die.